Would you like to work less and succeed more? Worry less and enjoy more? Would you like to cut out half of all you do and get twice as much done? Well, you were taught that more with more. What that means is that you've got to work harder. You've got to do more to get more. Well, that can work, but there is a better way. And people might call you nuts when you say less can be more. They might say less can't be more. Well, it can. Welcome. My name is Blaine Elkers, and my life purpose is to help people experience wellness and create infinite wealth for their life purposes. So I'm with a collection of other business partners. We get together, and that's what we do. That's what we work on. I'm in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I've been an entrepreneur most of my life. I did a few corporate jobs, and then I got into owning businesses by myself, for myself, and I've been working from my home since 1995 and supporting myself through that. And when I came across this concept, that allowed me to work less and succeed more, worry less and enjoy more, and actually get more done than almost every other person I know, it really was a life changer. And it all starts with this man. Who is this man? I've got a man on the screen here. You're watching the webinar portion. Who is this man? I actually even have his autograph there, if you could make that out. His name is Vilfredo Pareto. Right? He's Italian, right? And he was born on July 15th, 1948. I actually was born on July 15th, 160-something years later. But anyway, he was born on July 15th in Paris. He's an Italian economist and sociologist. And he discovered, back in the late 1800s, he discovered that 80% of the wealth was owned by 20% of the people, not just in Italy, which is, he's an Italian, but also as he looked at it and studied it in every other country, right? He later realized that 20% of of 80% of his garden's pea pod harvest came from just 20% of the pea pods. So other studies began to find similar ratios, this similar 80-20 ratio in other industries and in nature. And so this became known as the Pareto principle, that 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts. It also became known as the vital and the trivial. And what that means is he was saying that there's this 20% that's vital, and there's this other 80% that's trivial, that doesn't cause anything to happen. It's not useful. It's trivial. And in many cases, 20% or less of things are vital to your outcomes, and the many, 80% or more of the things are trivial. They don't impact the outcome. So 164 years old today, and you may have heard of this before, is the 80-20 rule, right? So the 80-20 rule. 80% of your results come from just 20% of your efforts, right? So think about that. And it started in business, right? So 80% of the sales comes from 20% of the sales reps, right? Or 80% of the orders come from just 20% of the customers. And in business, this is proven out time and time again. For example, I'm involved in a health and wellness business, and we have 2.8 million customers, but we've got about 500,000 of them are active, and we're engaged with them, and we're direct mailing them. And so that's a 17.86%. That's close to 20. The numbers aren't always exact, but the concept is there, that there's a small subset of things that you do that cause most of the results, right? So 80% of the profits come from just 20% of the products, right? So this concept is very true. Another way to look at it, I've got on the screen, is that 20% of the inputs are producing 80% of the results, right? And then that other 80% of the inputs are only producing 20% of the results, right? So hopefully you're starting to see that this may end up being a pretty powerful concept, right? If 20% causes the 80%, there's a lot of power that comes from that. Now, this is not just in business, right? it's actually appropriate for any output of your life. If you look at your own happiness, you'll find that there's a subset. Let's say 20% of the things that you do bring you 80% of the happiness. Or if you look at most of your happiness comes from a smaller subset, right? 80% of your happiness comes from just 20% of certain activities. Same thing in relationships. You're going to find that there are things you can do within your relationships that make a difference. The smaller things, or out of all the people you know, there's going to be 20% of the people you know, you hang out with them more than 80% of the time, right? So it's not just in business. It's for anything that's happening, any kind of output of your life. And so what you can do is you can put this 80-20 rule, you can put this to use in your life, and you can actually use it to increase your productivity. And so how do you use it? How do you use this principle that's quite old and established? The first part is to focus in on the 20%, right? Focus in on the 20% that makes a difference, right? And they call that the law of focus, right? And the law of focus is where less really is more, because if you can focus your time, if you have, let's say you have 10 hours of stuff that you're doing, well, if you realize that 20% or 2 hours of that 10-hour time, those activities are giving you 80% of your results, right? You can focus in on that 20%. What are those things that are causing the outputs? And once you are aware of that, it makes a big difference, right? And in the law of focus, it starts just with an awareness. Just now, you're a new person now because you understand kind of the roots of, and you understand this 80-20 rule. And so being aware of that, whenever you're doing something, you begin to ask yourself, is this part of the 20%? Is this part of the 20, right? And if it's not, then you want to reduce that, reduce it, drop it, eliminate it, and you want to focus in on just the 20, right? And it's an identification process. As you go through life or sales or business or happiness or relationships, you want to begin an identification process to say, wow, I'm really happy right now. Why is that? Well, let's go back, because if you go back, you're going to find one of those 20% things that it was the cause of the happiness. Or if you're in business, and let's say that you get a sale, you get a new customer. How did you get that new customer? How did you get that income? How did you get the customer? Well, you're going to look back, and you want to look back and identify what were the steps that led you to that customer, because that's part of the 20. And you want to do more and more of that in your life, and you'll watch your life kind of a spiral to a new height. So the other key, focus on the 20. The other key is to reduce the other 80%, right? So as you look at it, if I spend 10 hours doing something, I want to identify those 2 hours, that 20%, but I also want to identify what are some things in the 80%. What are some things in that 8 hours that don't really impact my results, right? That are, instead of being vital, they're kind of trivial, right? So things that don't lead to results, you want to begin to reduce those as much as you can. And by doing that, there's this thing called the law of progress, is we can create more, we can actually create more with less. And how do we do that? Well, we do that first by the focus that we talked about. You've got to create that focus, find the 20%, right? Focus in on it. Number two is selectivity, your choice. You've got to begin to choose those 20% activities over the 80%, choosing the activities that give you results, which are only going to be 20% or less. A lot of times, instead of being the 80-20 rule, it's the 90-10 rule. Sometimes it's even the 99 to 1% rule. But you want to identify those things, and you want to choose those things. And then the last, innovation. And that's finding new 20% things. So that's when technology or a new way of doing things, or you discover something new, or you learn a new skill, right? You all of a sudden take things to the next level, right? Innovation. That helped me when I discovered how to use Skype in my business. I was building a business internationally, and calling people on the phone, that was okay. But when I learned how to use Skype and I could see the person, the relationships that I created overseas were 10 times better, right? And that was the 80-20 rule innovation style in work happening right there. So the last thing I just want to close with is, how would you like to cut out half of all you do and get twice as much done, right? Well, that's possible with the 80-20 rule, because 20% of your time, or the 20% of the things you do, 20% of your outputs produce 80% of the results, right? So if you could focus in on that 20% and do 40% of the 20% activities, you would be producing 160% output, double the output, but you've cut out 60% of what you normally do. And so when I'm coaching people initially, I say, look, instead of the 80-20 rule, that might be too hard for you. Let's just look at a 50-50 rule. Let's realize 80% of what you do is probably not adding to your bottom line results. But let's just look to cut out 50% of what you do. So as you're going through, half of the stuff you do is not impacting your business. Half the stuff you do is not impacting your happiness that much. Half the things you do is not impacting the quality of your life, your relationships, and those things. So you can do that. And just to summarize, focus. Find the 20%, right? Use selectivity. Choose the 20% items. And then innovation. Find new 20% items. But look for the 80-20 rule. It's showing up in your life. It's showing up in your business. And if you start to use that 80-20 rule, right, 20% of your efforts produce 80% of your results, we're finding that in industry and kind of naturally in nature, you will come closer to the life you desire, the life you design, and the life you deserve. So thank you. I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to that. Get back to the person that shared this with you, right? They've got some more tips and some more training on living the 80-20 life. Lane Elkers from Scottsdale, Arizona. Have a great day.